Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of Stone of Madness. Stone of Madness is a real-time tactical stealth game developed by The Game Kitchen, the creators of the very successful Blasphemous games, and published by Tripwire Presents. It was released this past January, but I actually had played the demo during the fall Steam Next Fest last year, and liked it for the most part. So when I got the key from the publisher, thank you Tripwire, I was excited to give it a go. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to finish the game, partially because of time constraints to get this video out by a deadline, and also because it didn't really click with me the further I played. Before I get too ahead of myself though, let's get to the review. The presentation is immediately distinct with its unique hand-drawn art and animations. The inspirations behind this aesthetic comes from the 18th century Spanish painter Francisco de Goya. I'm essentially ignorant of de Goya's work, but I can see from my glancing over some of his paintings the use of similar colors and textures in Stone of Madness' art, especially when it comes to the character portraits when in dialogue. However, I really enjoyed the cartoon aesthetic of their cinematics. Personally, I do think the visual style clashed slightly with the portraits, but I really enjoyed them. I wish there had been more cinematics in my time with the game. Audio-wise, I think things were okay here. Many of the tracks used piano and string instruments that had a melodious sound when you were exploring, although it could quickly switch to a tense track when necessary, such as when being chased, or even just there for a slightly unsettling ambience. One thing I wish the game had was more voice lines. The cinematic had a narrator and the intro was voiced by Father Alfredo, one of the main cast, but that's about it. I would have loved to have seen each character have their own voice dialogue, as it would add more to their personality. However, I can understand why this might not have made the cut if it came down to budget. The intro starts with Father Alfredo narrating how he came to be a patient of the monastery's insane asylum. The priest was under orders to aid the monastery, only to find that the Inquisitor present was corrupt and hurting the patients he was supposed to be helping. Alfredo tried to expose these atrocities, only to be locked away with the rest of the deranged. One day, he sees a young woman named Virginia being dragged away, so the father decides to pursue them to see if he could help and also find more dirt against the Inquisitor. Along the way, he meets an eclectic cast of characters who all decide to help him. He starts off with Eduardo, a strong, mute man who's been in the asylum for some time now, and Leonora, a headstrong daughter of a watchmaker who's okay with cracking a few skulls to get things done. During the prologue, you meet two others, but don't get to control them until the main campaign, who are Agnes, a kind old woman who also happens to be a witch, and Amelia, a young orphan who was under the care of the nuns. It's unfortunate that, despite all these seemingly interesting characters, the game doesn't do anything with them. The characters merely serve as tools for the player, with each having their own set of abilities. Some of their personality comes through in their dialogue scenes between objectives, but most of the time they're just discussing their next course of action. They work together towards a unified goal with pretty much no conflict with one another. For instance, Leonora can kill people to get them out of the way, but the father abhors violence. However, this never comes up as a problem for either one of them. It's a huge missed opportunity that the game could have explored more in depth with. Obviously, this isn't a character-driven narrative, but a plot-driven one, so how's that writing? Well, it starts off interesting enough with the introduction of the titular Stone of Madness. Players choose to give it to one of two different people, and that determines the campaign that you play. However, all that mystery after the prologue is immediately hard stopped, at least as far as the first campaign is concerned. Actually, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I only got just past halfway in the first campaign before making my review. And this was because of the reasons stated in the beginning of the video, because of time obligation, and I just didn't really care for the game overall. That said, one of the reasons why I had no interest in playing further is because the story is drip-fed to the player. Upon starting the first campaign, entitled The Corrupt Hand of the Church, you're tasked with finding someone who wants to speak with you. Turns out it's a nun who believes that the Inquisitor is up to no good. Well, surprise, surprise, we already knew this from the intro. Anyway, she wants us to find out what he's been up to in order to expose him to the abbot. Each section is presented with an objective to follow, and more story isn't really given to the player until they figure out how to meet the objective, which greatly affects the pacing of the game, as I'll talk about again later. In my 16 hours with the game, I found out that the Inquisitor is conducting unethical experiments on the mentally deranged in the asylum. That's it. Something that could easily be assumed just because of the theme and setting. I don't think I'd have a problem with this if there was more meat here to chew on. Something a bit more interesting, more things happening, or just a gameplay loop that got us to this conclusion sooner to get us to the more exciting parts of the story. Perhaps the other campaign is different, but I wasn't too keen to give it a try by the time I decided to write up this review. The gameplay loop of Stone of Madness takes place over the course of an in-game day, where players control up to 3 characters and explore the monastery while trying to complete their objectives. Then, at the end of the day, they return to their cell and prepare for the following day by taking certain specific actions. Upon first receiving an objective, the initial exploration of an area or set of areas usually involves a bit of reconnaissance. You need to get a lay of the land to determine what it is you need to get for your objective, which usually involves talking with someone or gathering a certain item. Players will want to take notes of guards, potential hiding places, things that specific characters can interact with, and of course, pilfering whatever containers they can find for much needed resources. Obviously, these objectives are usually not straightforward and require a bit of thinking on how to complete them. Several obstacles can be in the way, which tends to be roaming guards, nuns, and/or friars. However, there are other things such as prohibited areas that, if seen while present in one, can cause problems for your characters. Even in non-prohibited areas, if your character or characters are caught doing something suspicious, then that would be bad. Loud noises, whether from your characters doing a loud action, or from animals or even rowdy inmates, can all draw attention to your merry little band. Time is also an obstacle, or a boon. Throughout the day, the world changes dynamically as the monastery inhabitants move around or filter out of rooms. Friars might go to their sleeping quarters at night, or various inmates gather in certain areas instead of being dispersed throughout. In the evening, there are fewer guards standing around, however, that's also when the anima materialize. These supernatural entities will patrol the halls as well and try to chase and catch wandering player characters. There's not that much difference between guards and anima though, other than who can incapacitate or eliminate them, and what they do to your characters if one of them gets caught. If a guard catches a character, then they lose the health and gain a point of suspicion. As long as they didn't meet their health or suspicion threshold, then they respawn at the entrance point to the area. Otherwise, they are sent back to their cell for the remainder of the day. If an anima catches someone, then they take a big blow to their sanity. If their sanity drops to 0, then they gain a trauma. Traumas are elements that can further hinder a character. These traumas can range from Agnes having difficulty running, that if she does, it stuns her because she threw out her back, or the priest suffering from headaches because of loud noises. These further compound with their phobias that also affect how you'll be able to use your characters. These phobias are an important distinguishing feature of Stone of Madness. Characters all have unique phobias that hinder them in certain situations. The father, for example, can't be near dead or unconscious bodies because he hates violence, whereas the little girl, Amelia, is afraid of all the scary gargoyle statues perching from the many pillars throughout the monastery. If they do have prolonged exposure to these phobias, then they start taking sanity damage. Some characters can help others, like the father being able to destroy the gargoyles by banishing its evil, I guess. Anyway, it's a unique system that forces player to try and think carefully about who they should bring with them and come up with ways around certain obstacles. Now, what do I think about all this as a complete package, though? Well, at first I enjoyed getting the objectives and finding my way through the monastery. There wasn't much in the way of hand-holding beyond some dialogue and environmental hints as to where you needed to go or what needed to be done. However, there were a few times when I just had no idea where I was supposed to go and would be wandering the same hollowed halls over and over again, trying to comb through every possible interaction. I did make progress, but this really dragged the pacing down for me. I don't know if I missed a vital clue, or maybe there should be a bit more signposting. I thought the objectives rewarded players for coming up with their own solutions, though. Most seem to have multiple ways to accomplish tasks. However, I ran into several situations where it felt like the only time that would be most optimal would be during a certain time window. and if I couldn't complete what I needed to do in that small window, then I'd have to do it the next day. There was a way to skip time blocks during the day, but required your character to meditate at select statues, but every time I needed them, they always seemed to be on the opposite end of the monastery. Having the right characters for the job is super important as well. Unfortunately, you may not always know who to bring because you're not entirely sure where you need to go and what obstacles you need to overcome. There were so many times when I selected my characters, only to find out soon after that I didn't have the one person I needed to progress. Then, once again, I needed to wait until the next day. Oh, and I didn't mention this, but every time a day passes, the characters all lose sanity. Which also reminds me that I didn't really mention the night phase, so I'll do so now. At night, each character has certain action points they can perform that cost action points. Leonora can play her violin to raise everyone's spirits. Eduardo can repair said violin when it inevitably breaks. And Alfredo can feed everyone chocolate when you don't have the parts to repair the violin. Each character has several other actions to perform at night, but the idea is to replenish their vitals and prepare items for the day ahead. And then you select your characters for the day. Jumping back to what I was saying earlier, there were times when it was my own fault. I forgot what a certain obstacle was, or wasn't thinking clearly for an objective. For instance, one particularly amusing situation is when I needed to read a certain book in the library to discover a cure for some poison ailing the abbot. Well, I finally was able to figure out how to get my characters into the inner area of the library and get past the guards, only to find it didn't matter. None of the 3 characters I brought that day knew how to read. Other times, it's trial and error, aka the game throwing you under the bus. The aforementioned cure I read about needed certain ingredients, one of them being mandrake roots. Well, it didn't actually tell me what I needed to collect until after I started the day. However, the only person who can collect plants is Agnes, the witch, who I didn't bring with me, so I needed to wait until the next day to attempt it. It's things like this that were infuriating, and I wish they had a way to swap characters out midday or skip to the next day immediately. The phobias were another thing that was great on paper, but in practice, I felt they were more annoyances than anything else. As I said, certain characters can help others eliminate their phobia, such as Agnes putting out a brazier so Leonora, who is afraid of fire, can pass. However, many times, I found that I usually didn't have the right person necessary to counter the phobia. And it wasn't always because of poor planning, but because I was actually planning and needed the 3 who I had chosen. So a lot of the time, your characters just have to deal with it and take a bit of sanity drop. I'm grateful that I didn't have too many traumas during my time with the game, although that may be because I didn't get far enough into it. I usually manage to avoid traumas because you have different ways to improve the group's sanity levels at night. Furthermore, Agnes can gain the ability to cure disorders as long as you have a panacea. However, if none of this was the case, then I could see this being increasingly frustrating to have to deal with multiple characters with traumas and their own phobias. A couple other closing points about the gameplay. The first being that characters you have assigned to follow the lead won't actually follow through a transition point. Instead, you have to manually send each one through. This was really annoying. Especially so because sometimes you may leave someone behind by their phobia, so they lose unnecessary sanity as you make the transition with the other character and then switch to the person you need to move. Or they're by a guard who's about to see them. It's frustrating, but luckily they're working on a patch to fix this. The other thing is just the frustration that can come about at times because you need to control everyone, and there isn't any easy way to do that. Originally, the game didn't have any sort of tactical pause like other games in this genre do. It was added in later, but I still feel it's lacking. The best thing it lets me do is that if I get a notification that someone is in trouble, I can at least hit the pause button and then switch over to that character to maybe help them get out of harm's way. However, if multiple characters are in trouble, then you're just kinda screwed. There's no way to assign move orders other than through direct control, so yeah, someone's more than likely gonna get caught. I guess all this boils down to is trying to be careful with where you're placing characters when not controlling them to mitigate these situations. A lot of the time, I stuff people in hiding spots if I wasn't actively moving them. And that brings us to the value and my final thoughts. But first, if you're enjoying the review or found it helpful, then please consider giving it a like, as that helps me out greatly with the YouTube algorithm gods. Stone of Madness runs for $29.99 USD, and I put about 16 hours into the game. This game just wasn't for me. I wanted to like it, but the mediocre storytelling and the gameplay just didn't click for me. Actually, I'd like to make this fully apparent, but it could just be a skill issue on my end and lack of experience with the genre. I never really played anything quite like this before. Furthermore, I know that I constantly forgot to use other abilities within my character's kits, such as the father's ability to blend in by wearing his priest robes. Also, there's a good possibility I didn't choose certain ability upgrades that maybe would have made things easier for me. I definitely can see the appeal for this game, and I think there's a good foundation even if some things were misses. I'd also say that if you do like the game, then there will definitely be value to be had here. There's 2 campaigns, and I chose the one that was shorter. Obviously, it may not take others quite as long as it took me to get to the point I'm at, but I could see this game easily taking at least 30 hours. And How Long to Beat confirms this with a 37.5 hour average if you're playing the main story and doing all the side stuff. If you played the game, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't, then let me know if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.